Welcome to another episode of the OpenChain Partner Webinar Series. As always, we're highlighting the type of services you can find around the world to support adoption and use of ISO IEC 5230, the international standard for open source license compliance. This time around, we're highlighting two entities run by McCoy Smith, one a law firm and another a consultancy service provider. We hope that you find it useful to watch this webinar. As always, we'll be doing our questions segment via our mailing lists to ensure maximum distribution.
Hello, my name is McCoy Smith, and I'm here to introduce you to two members of the OpenChain Partner Network, LEX Pan Law and OPSEQUIO. So the two entities involved here were both founded by me, and I am the sole employee of both of these. LEX Pan Law and OPSEQUIO have been members of the OpenChain Partner Network for more than 2.5 years. So here's the announcement from OpenChain in March of 2020, announcing that both entities were part of the OpenChain Partner Network. The two entities have different functions. LEX Pan Law is a law firm, so it's listed under the law firm grouping of OpenChain partners. OPSEQUIO, on the other hand, is a service provider, specifically open source consulting services, and is therefore listed under the service provider grouping of the OpenChain Partner Network. A little bit about me. You can see here, this is a snapshot of the website for LEX Pan Law, the law firm, detailing a little bit about my background, which I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next couple of slides. So LEX Pan Law and OPSEQUIO were both founded in 2019. Prior to founding these two entities, I spent 20 years in-house as a lawyer in a very large US-based multinational technology company, where I had two main functions. One was operating as an intellectual property lawyer, but I also was the lead lawyer on open source legal issues for that company during most of the 20 years that I worked there. Prior to going in-house as a lawyer, I was a lawyer in private practice on the East Coast of the United States in New York, and Washington, D.C., where I specialized in intellectual property law. I'm licensed in 3 different states in the United States, including New York and California, as well as the state where I'm headquartered, Oregon. I'm a licensed patent attorney in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in the U.S., and I'm a licensed patent agent and trademark agent in the Canadian Intellectual Property Office as well. I have degrees in engineering, liberal arts, and the law, all from various universities in the United States. My background in open source legal issues goes back quite a long way. For many years, I was the chair or co-chair of a committee relating to open source in one of the bigger associations of industry in the United States around intellectual property issues. I sat for many years on the editorial board of what may be the only law review or law journal that was dedicated to open source legal topics. Very involved in a number of open source license drafting initiatives over the years, and frequently lecture around the world on topics related to both the law and open source, as well as just intellectual property law in general. One of the activities I've been engaged in recently is, as you can see in this slide, a book that will be coming out from Oxford University Press sometime in the fall of 2022, I authored a chapter relating to copyrights and how they work in free and open source software licensing. And I co-authored a chapter on patents and how they operate through free and open source software licensing. Both of those topics are ones that frequently come up when people are asking for legal advice around open source licensing. In terms of location, both these entities are headquartered in Portland, Oregon. So for those of you who are not familiar with the geography of the United States, Portland, Oregon is located in the Pacific Northwest region of North America. Portland, Oregon is relatively close to the tech hub of Seattle, Washington in the United States, and Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. I own homes both in Oregon in the United States and in British Columbia, Canada. So I travel quite frequently to Seattle and Vancouver, British Columbia as I go between those two homes. I'm also relatively close, although it's a plane ride away, to the tech hubs in the Bay Area of California and Los Angeles. And I am licensed as a lawyer in California, as well as Oregon and New York. So the two entities that I want to introduce you to are LexPan Law. It is a law firm that offers intellectual property law services, as well as expert legal advice around open source legal issues. OPSEQUIO, on the other hand, is a consultancy company that offers services around compliance with open source practices and licenses, as well as offering virtual OSPO services for entities that may not have the capability of hiring their own OSPO. So LexPan Law, there's the web address for the law firm website. Offers any number of legal services around open source legal issues, including license analysis, compatibility advice, contribution policies, engagement with communities, both legal and technical, understanding tool scans and what they mean for compliance, M&A and due diligence assistance when you're doing an M&A deal and you need some advice on the due diligence results, either as they relate to intellectual property or open source, as well as policy advice and documentation where people are trying to set up policies internally. Very often, LexPan Law is hired by companies who may have an internal lawyer who may have some familiarity with open source issues, but may need some additional assistance on tricky issues or issues which have not yet been documented or written about, and particularly issues around tricky questions of copyright and or patent as they relate to open source licensing or open source policies. We also do general patent portfolio advice and how patent portfolios intersect with open source activities, and can do patent defensive work as well. As an example of that, the law firm recently, within the past year, challenged a patent that had been asserted against a well-known open source project, the GNOME project, and eventually had that patent invalidated through processes in the Patent and Trademark Office in the United States. So that's one of the things we also do our office services on. OPSEQUIO, on the other hand, was an entity that I'd set up for clients who may not necessarily have needed or wanted legal services, but did need some general consultancy services around basic issues of compliance. For example, how does one provide source code? How does one satisfy attribution requirements when one is dealing with open source licenses? As well as virtual OSPO services. So for small companies that may need an OSPO, but are not yet ready to hire a full-time person, OPSEQUIO can be hired to kind of fulfill that role for them on a part-time basis. So we can give all sorts of different advice on engagement around open source and how to set up an internal process or to run an internal process for you when you don't necessarily need a lawyer helping you with legal advice. In terms of getting in touch with us, I've left my 2 email addresses for both entities on this slide here. If you have any questions or you want to know a little bit more about the 2 businesses, feel free to drop me an email at those email addresses. Both entities also run Twitter feeds and post occasionally on topics that, or interesting issues that may be coming up in either the open source legal world or the open source compliance world. I also run a blog on the LEX Pan Law legal website, which has an RSS feed where I give a little bit more detailed analysis of issues that I think are of interest that aren't amenable to the character limits under Twitter. I try to keep that feed directed to issues where I don't see a lot of other people writing. So I'm not just going to post new cases or new issues that you may be seeing from a lot of other people in the open source or the intellectual property legal world. I try to foresee issues or spot issues that people aren't concentrating on and write up my thoughts on them for people who may want to get alerted to issues that they may not be thinking about. So those are the 2 entities and what they do and how to get a hold of them. If you have any questions about the entities, feel free to email me. There's also, I believe, a mechanism that OpenChain is going to provide to send questions at the end of this presentation. So I welcome those sorts of questions as well. Or if you just want to see what we are thinking about or talking about, or where I'm thinking, feel free to either look at us on Twitter or subscribe to the RSS feed for the LEX Pan Law blog. Otherwise, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing from anybody who is interested.
Thank you for watching this webinar. For more information about McCoy's companies, please contact him directly, and you can do so via our mailing lists. Just send an email to any of our lists, such as main@openchainproject.org, and we will make sure you are connected with McCoy. If you want to speak with him directly, he provided some of his direct contact details as well. We will have another partner webinar soon, which will highlight yet another service provider around the world that can support people's journey around the ISO standard for open source license compliance. We hope you found this webinar useful. We hope you'll enjoy our other webinars. And of course, we're open to suggestions for improvement and adjustment in any way you think will benefit us all. Finally, one big thank you, McCoy, for your presentation. Great to have you here, and looking forward to next time.